Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, members of the Pan-European Union, I would like to welcome you all on the occasion of this traditional forum organized by the Croatian Pan-European Union for Europe Day. This year, the title of this round table is Past, Present and Future of the European Union. Just like every year, the partner organization in this traditional event is the Hans-Seidel Foundation. I would like to thank them for their long-standing cooperation and support that they give to the Croatian Pan-European Union, but as well all other Pan-European organizations across Europe. I would just like to say that the topic today is the European Union, but Europe as a whole as well. I am very pleased to be able to welcome our panelists in the first part, Mr. Mislav Ježić, President of the Croatian Pan-European Union, Mrs. Aleksandra Markić-Boban, Head of Project Office Zagreb of the Hans-Seidel Foundation, Mr. Klaus Fiesinger, the Regional Director of the Hans-Seidel Foundation. He will be speaking over the video link, Mr. Tomislav Sokol, Member of the European Parliament from Croatia, and Mrs. Andreja Metelko-Zgombić, State Secretary from the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs of the Republic of Croatia. At the outset, I would also like to welcome our distinguished guests who are here with us in the room, as well as all those joining us over the video link. The President of the International Pan-European Union, Mr. Alain Terrenoire, is with us, and of course, Secretary General of the International Pan-European Union, Mr. Pavel Barišić. I would also like to welcome our friends and colleagues from other Pan-European organizations across Europe. So much in a way of introduction, and now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Ježić. The floor is your, Academician Ježić. Madam State Secretary for European Affairs, Mrs. Metelko-Zgombić, International Pan-European Union President, Mr. Alain Terrenoire, Regional Director of the Hans-Seidel Foundation, Mr. Klaus Fiesinger, Madam Head of Office, Mrs. Aleksandra Markić-Boban, ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the International and Croatian Pan-European Union. I am pleased that this year we are continuing our tradition of celebrating Europe Day in cooperation with the Hans-Seidel Foundation. This has become a lovely tradition. Last year we had to break it due to the newly arised circumstances triggered by the pandemics of COVID-19. Now we are continuing this tradition despite still uncertain circumstances. For that we are grateful to the head of the project office in Zagreb, Mrs. Aleksandra Markić-Boban, and the Regional Director, Klaus Fiesinger. Let us remember that this cooperation with the Hans-Seidel Foundation started immediately after the setup of this foundation in Zagreb, and the first head of the regional office, Baroness Angela Adamović, immediately established a cooperation with our Croatian Pan-European Union. This cooperation that started in the 90s continued handsomely, and we have been now cooperating with Mrs. Markić-Boban for a number of years. In our pan-European activities, the cooperation with the government, its Prime Minister Andrej Plenković, who had been a member of our presidency, and the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, and now the incumbent Minister Gordan Grlić-Radman, is especially important. The Croatian Pan-European Union has always strived to help the Republic of Croatia in interpreting the importance, aspirations, and the role of the Republic of Croatia in Europe, in the EU bodies and the international community, but also in propagating European benchmarks and values in Croatia. And this undoubtedly has no true sense or efficiency without the government and the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs. This is why it is very important to us that some of the members of the Croatian Pan-European Union and the youth of the Croatian Pan-European Union are now holding prominent positions in the European Union, such as, for example, MEPs, Mr. Karlo Reser, Mr. Željana Zovko, and Mr. Tomislav Sokol, who is one of our keynote speakers today. One of the highest-ranking EU officials is the Vice President of the European Commission, Mrs. Dubravka Šuica. We are going to hear her recorded announcement of the Conference on the Future of Europe. And our roundtable is a contribution to this conference as well. The conference is starting officially on Sunday, on Europe Day in Strasbourg. We can all participate through the platform futureeu.europa.eu, so I would kindly invite you all to join if you can. Also, the President of the Council of Europe, Mrs. Pejčinović-Burić, frequently participated in our conferences. In the European Parliament, the Pan-European Working Group is currently presided over by 3 young people, among them Mr. Carlo Ressler. So it is something that means a lot to us that the Croatian Pan-European Union inspired and contributed to the fact that our representatives can work for the greater European good as part of the EU working bodies. The Croatian Pan-European Union is celebrating its 30th anniversary in 2021. It was founded on the 27th of May, 1991 in Zagreb. We are intending to celebrate this anniversary more fully on the occasion of our annual conference that will be held from the 21st to the 23rd October this year. Then we expect among keynote speakers a very important person. This is Mr. Bent Posselt, who was there also for our founding assembly. He was the then representative of the International Pan-European Union and the then president, Mr. Otto von Habsburg. He is an esteemed member of the presidency of the International Pan-European Union and a long-standing president of the German Pan-European Union. After very active, it was encouraged to do so by the then circumstances which were marked by the defense of the Republic of Croatia from aspirations stemming from greater Serbia aspirations and their aggression. We were striving for the international recognition, and later on we also accompanied Croatia on its path to the European Union, bearing in mind also the interests of our neighbors. It was actually very important that our work was set around 3 priorities. The first one was informing the international public on the events in Croatia and its neighborhood at the time of war and the flood of biased misinformation. The second one was getting humanitarian aid to the hardest hit parts of Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. And the third one was organizing local and international fora and conferences on the current, ongoing and far-reaching issues happening in Croatia and its neighborhood in the European Union. We had hosted a number of prominent intellectuals, scientists, politicians, and economists from the EU and the USA. These activities of ours did not go unnoticed in the International Pan-European Union. In 1994, towards the end of it, as the president of the Croatian Pan-European Union, I was elected to the presidency at the Assembly in Strasbourg of the International Pan-European Union, and very soon Dr. Otto von Habsburg appointed me as his first vice president among the 3 vice presidents. Already in 1995, with the help of the Archduke Otto von Habsburg and his assistant Stefan Bayer, whom you will be hearing as a keynote speaker today, we managed to organize an exhibition that was first set up in the European Parliament, and then, after a resound success, it toured Europe, its capital cities and political centers, starting from the UNESCO Palace in Paris, and then moving on to Vienna, Cairo, Thessaloniki, Dubrovnik, Dresden, Berlin, Munich, Prague, Bratislava, and Budapest. At the same time, we set up the Croatian Pan-European Youth Organization, and we started branching out in Istria, Karlovac, Zadar, Dubrovnik, Osijek, Split, Požega, Varaždin, and Čakovec. We especially wanted to branch out in the 1990s in the hardest hit parts of Croatia, the ones that were under threat. So as soon as it was possible, in cooperation with the City Museum of Vukovar and its director, Ruža Marić, as well as the Croatian Society of Music Artists, we organized and initiated the Vukovar Chamber Music Festival. It was first organized in 1999 and held in the Eltz Castle, then still in ruins. And it is still going on now for over 20 years with the support of the city and the county. The great cooperation that we established with the former president of the International Pan-European Union, the Archduke Otto von Habsburg, continued with his successor, Mr. Alain, to whom I am one of the vice presidents. And the Croatian Pan-European Union, due to its pan-European activities, has a prominent role in the International Pan-European Union until today. This goes to show also by the fact that Professor Pavel Barišić, who successfully led the Croatian Pan-European Union from 2003 to 2016, was elected in February 2020 in Strasbourg as the Secretary General to the International Pan-European Union, and he is doing his work conscientiously and with dedication. Professor Barišić, as the president of the Croatian Pan-European Union, introduced the tradition of organizing annual conferences outside Zagreb every other year, and so far they were held in Dubrovnik, Pula, Opatija, Split, Požega, Vukovar, Karlovac, and Osijek. He thus encouraged lively activity of the Croatian Pan-European Union not only in Zagreb, where its headquarters are, but in all branch organizations across Croatia. The former era of the Croatian Pan-European Union was marked by the defense war and the lodging of application for EU membership. Mr. Barišić's time was marked by EU accession talks and fighting obstacles that Croatia encountered on its path to the EU. In all this, Croatian Pan-European Union was very active in cooperation with its Pan-European friends from the International Pan-European Union, especially the International President Otto von Habsburg and Mr. Bent Posselt, the MEP and the shadow rapporteur for Croatia, as well as Mr. Alain, who prepared a very constructive report on Southeast Europe for the French governmental bodies. The accession to the EU was celebrated with the organization of the International Conference on the 1st July 2013 in Vukovar. 7 years later, we lived to see Croatia presiding over the Council of the European Union in 2020 in difficult circumstances brought about by the pandemics and further aggravated by earthquakes in Zagreb, but Croatia coped well by using state-of-the-art IT technology. And it is now that Mrs. Dubravka Šuica, as the Vice President of the European Commission, has a key organizational role in the preparation of the Conference for the Future of Europe, which will also be relying on this state-of-the-art technology and foresees the green and digital transformation of Europe, as well as strengthening democracy and the resolution of a number of ongoing problems the EU is facing. We've spoke about those problems in our former conferences. Some of them are climate change, health threats, migration, social stratification, safeguarding our nature and environment, political changes, including Brexit, and also a gradual joining of new member states, including 6 countries in the Croatian neighborhood. Also desirable changes in the organizational structure of the EU, the development of technology and economy, the development and safeguarding of cultural identity and cultural life that should in fact encompass humanity and all living beings with whom we are sharing our fate on this planet. This celebration on the occasion of Europe Day is, in fact, for that reason, dedicated to the past and present, but also to the future of the EU in the global context and its commitment to the aforementioned Conference on the Future of Europe. These thoughts on the future of Europe now have to start in Croatia when the Croatian Pan-European Union is marking its 30th anniversary. I spoke about our former work, but I'm sure that other keynote speakers will be speaking about the future European perspective and the future of Europe. As I can vouch, our young members and representatives in the EU bodies actually show that we can be proud that our former work in the Pan-European Union indeed leaves us hopeful of a better future of Europe and our Croatia in its realm. Now I would like to give the floor to the representatives of the co-organizer of this celebration of Europe Day, Mrs. Aleksandra Markić Boban, the head of the Hans-Seidel Foundation Regional Office, and then our other keynote speakers, State Secretary Mrs. Andreja Metelko-Zgombić, as well as our dear friend and President of the International Pan-European Union, Alain, and all the other distinguished guests. I would finally like to wish this round table a lot of success, and I hope it will inspire us to ponder future activities for the greater good of Croatia, Europe, and to the extent possible via Europe to the greater good of the world as a whole. Thank you.
Poštovani gospodine akademiče Ježić.
Academician Ježić, first and foremost, I would like to thank you for these kind introductory remarks. Allow me to congratulate you on the 30th anniversary of the Croatian Pan-European Union. I am very pleased that we are a part of this great common project. Mrs. Metelko-Zgombić, Madam State Secretary, Mr. Sokol, MEP, Mr. Terrenoire, Mr. Barišić, Mr. Fiesinger, Mr. Bayer, dear guests, dear Pan-Europeans. It is a great pleasure for me to be able to welcome you on behalf of the Hans-Seidel Foundation on the occasion of the traditional annual conference that our foundation and the Croatian Pan-European Union organize to celebrate Europe Day. Last year, unfortunately, we couldn't mark Europe Day together for reasons that are outside our control. Unfortunately, you know all what they are. The pandemics of COVID-19 and the earthquake. We cannot really call these instances events because that would actually imply that something happened and is over and done with, and this is not the case. We are still facing the consequences of these instances. We were derailed by these incidents, and this maybe showed us that we are not living the best of our times the way that we should. However, we were able to cope, and the actual conference on the future of Europe that academician Ježić mentioned ago served as an impetus to be more serious about current circumstances and understand them in a more serious and a more faithful manner than we would have without those past events. The round table that we organize traditionally is always a platform to ponder the past of the European Union, to try and find the solutions to the current challenges, but also to come up with creative, long-standing solutions for uncertainties bring about by the ever so complex future. And this is why we have chosen the title of the conference today that we have, and this is Past, Present and Future of the European Union. On the 7th of May 1824 in Vienna, the Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was performed for the first time, as well as its sixth movement with the Schiller's Ode to Joy. And my modest message for the future in this context is that we have to find reasons for joy in these difficult times that will help us find more creative and long-standing sustainable solutions for the future. What can actually give us hope to indeed find the right solution? The European legacy. This is something that gives us faith that we can find a solution for the future future of the European project and the European values. The European legacy and the European heritage is something that we have to become aware of, and we have to understand again that this is the foundation on which which allowed Europe to survive everything that happened in the history and strive still today. This is something that the French historian Jacques Le Goff called, and let me paraphrase, a well-used antiquity. And this is something that should be the main source of our inspiration. Do we all indeed believe in this European togetherness? Not really. When we were sending out invitations for the conference today, a distinguished professor sent a reply that took us aback and showed us that not everybody shares our faith in the European project. There are skeptics, there are defeatists, and this is a serious challenge. His reply to our very polite invitation was,
I'm sorry.
This sentence, I do not see the future of the European Union, sounds a lot like the renowned Hofmannsthal question. What's the use of having seen so much? Or let me paraphrase, what is this experience, all this experience for when we are facing the crisis again? And since the last amendments to the treaty, we have had several crises, internal challenges and internal crises that the European Union has been encountering for the last decade or even more, included Euro crisis, migration crisis, Brexit, the strengthening of the populist and nationalist forces across Europe. However, what seemed untouchable not so long ago has been put into question, and these are the very values of the European Union as contained in Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union. These are social and political norms, ethical, philosophical, cultural and political norms that gave Europe this image of standardizing power, and to us, European, a certain assurance that the rule of law will be respected, that there is a foundation that is built on the solidarity between a human being and his community, his city, and the European Union itself. And this is why the discussions of the kind that we are going to have today have to include those that harbor different opinions, who do not believe in the same values, or at least not all of the values as stipulated by Article 2 of the Treaty on the European Union. And it is our task in the Hans-Seidel Foundation to remind them of this European togetherness that is translated into a solidary overcoming of challenges and preserving the European Union as the union of values. With this vision and the faith in the longevity of the EU project, I'm very pleased that we can again welcome distinguished keynote speakers with whom we have been cooperating for a long time and with whom we have been building the European togetherness. And I am really pleased that I am able to welcome all of you with whom we share the cohesive power of the European values that are the very foundation of the Pan-European Union, as well as the Hans-Seidel Foundation. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mrs. Markić Boban, for these lovely words. As a follow-up to what you said, what academician Ježić said, I think it is always good to have people who have dissenting opinions in order to wake us up, to take us out of our comfort zone. It is good to have some people to sort of poke our opinion and help us get out of our stupor and act. Also, as Mr. Ježić mentioned, it is important to have our representatives in important functions, not only at the European level, but also at the national level in our own countries, because this idea that we have been promoting for now almost 100 years is something that has to be promoted in the future, and it is good that this idea has a future. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Klaus Fiesinger, who will be speaking over the video link.
Vielen Dank. Lieber Herr Professor Ježić, liebe Frau
Thank you very much, Professor Ježić. Madam State Secretary Metelko-Zgombić, Your Excellencies, Friends and members of Europe, I would also like to welcome you on behalf of the Hans-Seidel Foundation on the occasion of this round table, on the occasion of this forum. Unfortunately, due to the COVID-19 pandemics, I can only participate online. This conference has its tradition. It is an important one, and it is especially so at the time when we have to provide signals for the future perspective of Europe, as seen via the pan-European idea. You know that the Hans-Seidel Foundation here in Croatia, but also regionally in Southeast Europe, stands for this kind of cooperation, the cooperation that is focused on values. We cooperate with our local partners, and this is something that we are going to continue doing in the future. This roundtable today is in the vein of the past, present, and future of the European Union, and it is also to a great extent marked to the neighborly and external relations of the Republic of Croatia. But this does not only touch upon the responsibilities that Croatia has as a member of the European Union. This is also linked to the very special geographical position of the Republic of Croatia that is in fact at the crossroads of the eastern and western part of Europe. And this is something that makes a Croatian responsibility even greater. It has to be a model to the region among the former Yugoslavian states. It has to take on an active role and be a leader when it comes to reform. The Hans-Seidel Foundation has also decided to give its own contribution to implementing this responsibility by providing support to Croatia in Croatia's relation with its southeastern neighbors. I say this not only as a project leader in Croatia, but also as a regional director for the entire Southeast Europe. The Western Balkans should not be left behind, should not be forgotten by Europe. It needs our support more than ever. It is, I think, the fate of the Western Balkans to always be perceived through a negative lens by the European Union. We know what this is all about. There have been many conflicts, religious conflicts, problems with organized crime and alike. However, I have to say that the majority of the population does respect the rule of law, they do respect legal provisions, they want to co-work and live together peacefully. We shouldn't forget that despite the differences among the 6 countries of the Western Balkans, there are also many similarities. For example, a common will to join the European Union. And this is something that should not be underestimated when it comes to the implementation of reforms. Manfred Weber, in one of the conferences organized by our foundation, said that for its own safety, Europe has to take care of the Western Balkans. And this is indeed true, because many populists in this part of the world, as well as different players coming from China, Turkey, Russia, and so on, work in a different direction, and their activities should not make us forget about the main benchmarks and values of the European Union. And I believe that we can all agree on that. The strategic sovereignty of Europe cannot be achieved without close ideological and structural ties and the inclusion of the countries of the Western Balkans, and this is why I believe that this should be welcome. The fact that
einen neuen Vorstoß unternommen haben.
As of March, we have the new Minister of Foreign Affairs, de facto, of the European Union, who basically gave impetus to the strategic debate on the future of the Western Balkans countries, in order for those countries to receive a rather concrete perspective of acceding to the European Union. Some of the countries, I have to say, and this is very worrying, keep turning to some other external interests, to other centers of power, economically speaking and politically speaking. These third countries have an ever so greater influence in the Western Balkans countries. Many citizens still in Europe still have a very negative perception of the Western Balkans, and vice versa, unfortunately. The European Union is there seen as union that lacks homogeneity, whose infrastructure is not efficient enough, who is not ready enough to be of help to the Western Balkans. We all know here that this is not so, that this is not true. However, as of recently, we were able to see how ruthlessly China, Russia, and Turkey as well abuse the pandemics onset by COVID-19 in their diplomatic activities. So this geopolitical dimension of the pandemic should not be underestimated under any cost. Also, let us just remember how negative the influence of the non-official documents speaking of possible border changes is. This is something that unfortunately causes and stirs uncertainty in the Western Balkans. We have to, as a part of the debate on the future of European Union, also speak about the future of the Western Balkans. I'm looking forward to interesting debates, and thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fiesinger, for these kind words, especially for emphasizing the importance of EU enlargement in the direction of Western Balkans country. This is very important also from the perspective of the Pan-European Union, and this is particularly important for Bosnia and Herzegovina. Allow me these personal words. I think you will all agree that we have a very turbulent political atmosphere, so we are hoping for a more specific and better solutions. And we are grateful for everything that is done in order to support Bosnia and Herzegovina in its rapprochement to the European Union. And now I would like to give the floor to the representative of the European institution, member of the European Parliament, Mr. Tomislav Sokol. Thank you very much. I would like to greet you all. Special greetings to Mr. Ježić, Mr. Fiesinger, Mrs. Markić, Boban, and to all other speakers at today's forum, at today's conference. I'm very grateful that you invited me and gave me the opportunity to speak on behalf of the European Pan-European Union. I always like to respond to such invitations because I think it's important to remind us all why European integration is so important. This is something that we often forget in our daily political discussions, that European Union is basically a peacekeeping project. It was born from after the destruction of the Second World War, where the center of the global power moved from Europe, and this was the only way for Europe to survive as a significant factor, as a significant global actor and power. European integration from its very beginning was based on economic interests and economic sphere because security and defense policy was much more complex. It was more related to NATO. And in the first decades of European integration, the fuel for the integration was economic integration through the European Economic Community. New perspectives opened at the end of 80s and beginning of 90s, where we witnessed two parallel processes which were interconnected. This is the fall of the Berlin Wall, which made it possible for the European community to spread towards east, and it was, and then we had a second round of enlargement in 2004, and Croatia enlargement to Croatia in 2013. Parallel to that, and parallel to the downfall of communism, which enabled the integration of Europe in one unified community. On the other hand, we have had and we've witnessed the development of the process of developing the European Union as the union which covers all important aspects of economic, social, cultural, and other aspects of life in Europe. And this is the context that we have today. And European Union is actually based on the Maastricht Treaty. When the European community was transformed into the European Union, this is the European Union which we still have today, and it's a European Union which is something that is indispensable today, and we cannot imagine our lives without European Union. Naturally, the European Union is also faced with many problems and challenges. There are various interests that need to be reconciled, and we are now in the period where the founding treaties have not been changed since more than 20 years. And this shows how the various and sometimes contrary interests in the European Union, and it points to the further direction of the development. The fact is that the European Union is very often blamed for all the problems, and very often the individual countries use European Union in order to justify and all frustrations that exist at the national level. So in a certain sense, European Union is an easy target because people do not identify as much with the European Union as they identified with the national states. And sometimes it makes it easy to blame the European Union for many various issues, which makes integration more difficult. After crises that happened, such as the migration crisis and the Brexit, now we've had a health crisis, which also exposed the European Union to numerous criticisms, but it also pointed to various problems that individual member states cannot resolve on their own. One of such potential problems is a pandemic, as we have now. Health systems in member states are very different. But it also showed that in the economic sense, without the help of the European Union, which now provided the largest package of assistance, national states would not have been able to overcome the consequences of such an economic crisis as was caused by this pandemic. So we have naturally the very significant principle of subsidiarity, but now we have the situation which also speaks of the need to resolve many issues on the at the European level. There have been many comparisons with the United States, Israel, etc., in terms of resolving the problems of pandemic, but I'm certain that our goals concerning vaccinations will be realized until the end of the summer, and it is quite certain that without the joint procurement of vaccines, especially for smaller countries such as Croatia, it would have been very difficult to obtain the necessary number of vaccines to achieve these goals concerning vaccination. It is the European Union that made it possible to have such joint procurements where Croatian citizens, it was made possible that they obtain vaccinations at the same time as citizens of bigger countries such as Austria, Germany, France, etc. So naturally there are problems which the member states cannot resolve on their own. These problems have to be resolved by the European Union. So without joint European policy, without European solidarity, especially small countries would be in a situation where they could be victim of various larger interests, as was the case in the history. So for small countries, there is no alternative to European Union. We often have to repeat this because the alternative of stronger powers defining all the important developments would be very unfavorable for smaller countries. So when we address all these challenges, as was mentioned by Ms. Ježić as well, we have the issue of the health system, we have the issue that was mentioned by Mr. Fiesinger, and this is the issue of COVID certificates, which will make it possible to move freely. And then there are other problems, such as the issue of security, issue of migrations, which is a structural issue and a long-term issue. Nigeria in 2050 will have more inhabitants than the entire European Union, so we have to define ways how to deal with migration pressure, and European Union certainly cannot be the safe haven for everybody who is seeking a better life from across the globe. And we have to deal with these issues. We have to prevent migrations in their route, because otherwise the European way of life will be threatened. Naturally, here we have the issues of economy and economic development and the European Green Plan. European Green Plan is certainly something that will affect the lives of all of us, and we have to take care that no one is left behind. We have to be aware that the European Green Plan, which brings us new technologies, new ways of life, but it will be a certain burden for the economy, as it will be connected to significant costs of implementation, and therefore the European Union and all the member states have to undertake everything that is in their power to help the stakeholders so that we do not cause another economic crisis. So we have to start a process which will be sustainable and which will not be detrimental to the economy. I'm very active in the fields of health, in the committee of fighting against cancer. The fact is that European Union still shows very big differences in terms of economic development, and healthcare or same level of healthcare is certainly not available to all European citizens. And this is where European Union shows how important it is for our everyday life. We are hoping that in 5 or 10 years we won't have such big discrepancies in healthcare, that all of us will have very similar level of healthcare. And this will be of great importance for the European cohesion. We have the issue of European Union in the international context. During the term of President Trump, it became evident that the European Union cannot rely on the United States as its exclusive partner, and the European Union has to find its own voice in relations to big powers such as China, Russia, and the others. Difficult aspect here is how to achieve one voice for the various member states of the European Union. We have to find consensus in key issues, and this will be one of the biggest challenges in future. And naturally, in the end, we have the issue of enlargement. We are very much aware that we cannot realistically talk about enlargement in the next 5 or 6 years, but it's important to have a European perspective for the candidate countries. It's important to reward them for everything that they are doing correctly and to sanction them for everything that they are not implementing. Here, Bosnia and Herzegovina is one of the key countries. There are various nations in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where with one nation particularly lacking many of the rights, and this is the Croatian nation, the Croatian people in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I think that we should use European Union to strengthen the European aspects in Bosnia and Herzegovina, to show them European perspective, and to design a system of incentives, not just for Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also for other countries such as Montenegro, etc. We want to create incentives so that these candidate countries don't get discouraged, and that they continue investing efforts into raising democratic and other standards, so that they comply with the demands of the European Union as soon as possible. This is where European Union has to be involved, especially because third countries such as Russia and Turkey, etc., are expressing their interests in these countries. So we certainly need to be present, we need to be active, and this is the perspective that needs to be given to these countries. These are some of the key issues, the question of institutional organization of the structure of the European Union, the way of decision-making, issue of European election, the system of Spitzenkandidates, and some other issues that are of great importance. But it's also important that we don't just discuss the institutions of the European Union, but also that we discuss crucial topics that directly impact the lives of our citizens, so that we can show to what extent the European Union influences our everyday life. It is European Union is not something distant and abstract and closed behind the doors of the European institutions. It is something that is very much alive and that very much influences our lives in terms of providing better health protection and support in many areas of lives. Pan-European Union as an organization that promotes European values can do a lot in this sense in the countries of Central and Southeastern Europe, and I hope that it will continue to do so through various activities, conferences, etc., and I will always respond to these invitations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sokol. Indeed, he has mentioned a number of important topics for the European Union and its future. What I find especially interesting and what I think is very important, that is that the European Union should not be always used as a scapegoat. We are not, in fact, even aware of the fact how important and what a blessing it is to live in peace for 7 decades. Even put all other benefits aside, this in itself is a huge accomplishment. We were able to also hear that we should do the reform, the internal reform of the European Union, and only then think about the further enlargements. But I am actually glad that now the situation has somewhat changed, and I agree with those who say that the integral part of the EU reform is the enlargement. And now I would like, at the end of this first panel, give the floor to Mrs. Andreja Metelko-Zgombić, the State Secretary from the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs. The floor is yours.
Hvala lijepa.
Thank you.
Poštovani gospodine akademiče Ježiću,
Academician Ježić,
poštovani gospodine Terrenoire,
Mr. Terrenoire,
poštovani profesore Barišiću,
Professor Barišić,
poštovani gospodine Fiesingeru,
Mr.
draga
Fiesinger,
gospođo Markić-Boban, dame i gospodo,
Madam Markić-Boban, ladies and gentlemen, my dear pan-European friends,
osobito mi je zadovoljstvo
it is indeed a great pleasure for me to be able to welcome you on behalf of the celebration of Europe Day in Croatia,
i u suradnji sa
in the organization of the Croatian Pan-European Union and in cooperation with the Hans-Seidel Foundation. I would also like to congratulate the Croatian Pan-European Union on its 30th anniversary. I am very pleased that this year Europe Day is celebrated also through this thematic round table that is a contribution to the debates taking place within the framework of the Conference on the Future of Europe. When we joined the European Union, we joined the community of democratic European states that joined their sovereignty in order to make it stronger, in order to respond to contemporary challenges in a more effective manner, and in order to be more influential on the global scene. By doing this, we accomplished one of the major external policy goals of the Republic of Croatia and became a member of one of the stronger communities in the world. Although Croatia is a full-fledged member of the European Union, and the integration part of Croatia still hasn't been completed. We are hoping to join Eurozone very soon, as well as joining the Schengen zone. We are working on this, and we have the quality, the knowledge, and the faith that we are about to meet these goals that we have set for ourselves. We became members of the European Union some 8 years ago, and for us this was the return to the political family to which we had always belonged. Now, as a member of this family, we are ready to invest in this family and contribute to its benefits. Our role was especially important when we were presiding over the Council of the European Union in the first part of the last year. This was the time that was also a transition to the new reality due to the consequences of the pandemics, and we were successful in that, despite the fact that we found ourselves in a rather unprecedented situation that impacted the world, also on the global level. We are a part of a power that has the financial, political, and the strength of values. And from the very beginning, the European Union has stood by its citizens that had been hard hit by the current circumstances. The strength of the European institutions is seen in the financial help, in the ever so increased deployment of vaccines that are going to help us to return to normal very soon, I hope. At the same time, we are part of the process that's going to help us to debate jointly the future of the European Union with those that are at the very heart of the EU project, and these are our citizens. The Conference on the Future of Europe will start officially on Europe Day on Sunday, on the 9th of May in Strasbourg. This conference is a unique European project that is geared towards further strengthening of the European democracy, that allows to our citizens to put forward their vision of the future of Europe through open, constructive, and frank debate. The European Commission is ready to hear the recommendations of the citizens of the European Union and implement them as a part of their competences. I would like to take this opportunity to remind you that the Conference on the Future of Europe was one of the prominent priorities of the presidency of the Republic of Croatia over the Council of the European Union. We actually wanted to start it during our presidency, and the initial idea was to organize the founding conference in Dubrovnik on Europe Day last year. Unfortunately, due to pandemics, we couldn't stick to that plan. However, we are very proud that the member states agreed on the position of the Council on the conference during our presidency, and then the interinstitutional talks ensued at the highest level. Dubravka Šuica, the Vice President of the European Commission for Democracy and Demographics, is competent for this process on behalf of the European Commission. The process is first and foremost focused on the citizens. The participation of the citizens is guaranteed through various ways. First and foremost, via an interactive, multilingual digital platform that is accessible in all 24 member states' languages, including Croatian. Citizens can use this platform in order to express their own ideas and opinions, for commenting other people's opinions, or organizing their own events. Everybody is welcome to express their vision of the common future and talk about climate and environment, health, strengthening of the economy, social justice and employment, the European Union's position in the world, values and the rights, the rule of law, safety and security, digital transformation, European democracy, migration, as well as education, culture and sport. There is also space for addressing all other issues and ideas that Croatian and other European citizens deem important. Apart from the digital platform, there are other ways in which citizens will be able to participate, namely through national and European panels and conferences that will take into consideration criteria such as geographical participation, gender, level of education, social and economic position, in order to make sure the citizens from all walks of life actively participate and can give their contribution. Also, special panels are planned for the youth, and civil society organizations and all interested stakeholders will be able to take part. The outcomes of the debates will be built within conclusions that will be published in spring next year, and they are going to serve as guidance for future developments in Europe. Allow me to say something about the work that has been done so far on the conference. We would like to contribute to the conference by giving the possibility to the Croatian citizens for their voice to be heard. We also feel that this conference is an opportunity for the European Union to be brought closer to the Croatian citizens and open them to the possibilities that the European Union opens for them. We have therefore set up the coordination body that, in fact, encompasses members from a wide range of public bodies, members of the parliament, regional and local government, as well as civil society organizations, in order for the process to be as inclusive as possible. We are currently working on the development of the thematic national plan that will be a part of the calendar of activities in the digital platform of the European Commission. We would like to focus on all those important issues for the everyday life of the Croatian citizens, and we would like to make sure that the Croatian perspective of the joint future is an integral part of the future action actions of the European Union. At the same time, we want to increase the visibility of the conference in order to encourage our citizens to participate. On the website of the Ministry of Foreign and European Affairs, there is a special section that is dedicated to the conference on the future of Europe. And this is where the citizens can find information and can find links to the digital platform. We are also intending to organize a number of events across Croatia with the participation of the wide range of participants. Through the dialogue with citizens, we would like to stress their main worries, aspirations, hopes and expectations. We would like to focus on the issues that are of the greatest importance for the Croatian citizens as well as the Republic of Croatia as a whole. This is going to be the Croatian contribution to the process of the conference and will be published on the digital platform of the European Commission. Hopefully, it will serve as the foundation for further debates that will take place at the level of the European Union. We are also planning an opening event in Croatia that will mark the official beginning of the conference. It will be held the next Thursday, on the 13th of May, in the National University Library in Zagreb, and will be headed by Andrej Plenković, the Croatian Prime Minister, with the participation of the Vice President of the European Commission, Mrs. Dubravka Šuica, and the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs, Mr. Goran Grlić-Radman. By way of conclusion, I would just like to stress that we expect for the academic community, the social partners, the civil society organizations at the local and regional level to take active part, and we expect the same from all interested parties. And this is why we welcome the round table today, which is a strong contribution to what is waiting for us in the next year or so until next spring, when we are expecting for the conclusions of the conference to be presented. Thank you very much, and I wish you all a very fruitful continuation of this round table. Thank you.
Thank you,
Mrs. Metelko-Zgombić. On this information, it is very important to know what the process will look like. I have to admit that I wasn't aware of certain details. I believe that by doing this, we are actually going back to the very roots of democracy, when the ancient Greek debated the future of their cities. And I believe that this is what we are doing with this conference today. We are bringing voice back to people. And I think this is important in order to hear what the European citizens believe is important for them. I am hoping for good results that we are going to hear in spring next year, and I hope that they will be mainstreamed, or rather built in legal acts that will work for the benefit of all European citizens, Croatian citizens included. This brings us to the end of our first panel, and we are now going to continue with our second panel discussion today. At the beginning of the second part of our round table, we are going to continue speaking about the conference on the future of Europe that Mrs. Metelko-Zgombić introduced. She said what the integral activities of the conference are. Unfortunately, Dubravka Šuica, Vice President of the European Commission for Democracy and Demographics, who is in fact in charge of the conference, cannot participate live here in the round table due to previous engagements. However, she prepared a recorded speech dedicated to this round table.
Akademiče Ježić, dear ladies and gentlemen, what a pleasure it is for me to address you, the Croatian Pan-European Union, on the subject of the Conference on the Future of Europe. We have collaborated on many projects together already. In my current role as Vice President in the European Commission for Democracy and Demography, I count on you as one of our partners, in particular in the upcoming Conference on the Future of Europe. The Croatian Pan-European Union, with its efficient organizational capacities and networks, and the key role it plays in the international Pan-European Union, is strategically placed to reach many citizens where it is not always possible for us to do so. My objective from day one in my current role is to invest all my energy in citizen engagement, deliberation, and participation at all levels of policy making. I have been conducting multiple citizens' dialogues across the European Union over the last year. It is only through direct engagement and deliberation that we can successfully and constructively go through the green and digital transitions. This is important for our democracy because these days it is having a hard time. People feel left behind. What do they blame? They blame democracy itself. But democracy is still the best invention. However, we need to improve ways to respond to citizens' needs. Our representative democracy works well, but it's not without fault. Now it's time to bring citizens into the heart of policymaking with the concrete power to drive systematic change. Politics is no longer business as usual. My task is to strengthen the links between people and the democratic institutions that serve them, to narrow the gap between expectations and reality. Our society has changed. Our work in demography shows this. We therefore need new thinking. We cannot solve new problems with outdated ways of looking at the world. The Conference on the Future of Europe is a sign of new thinking at the European level. It complements representative democracy and can increase trust in our democratic institutions. Through the conference, we will listen to Europeans and learn more about the issues close to their heart. Everyone will be able to feed their views into policymaking at the heart of our European Union. This should contribute to making our democracy more responsive. I know some of you have questions about the current status of the conference and the role you can play in it. To be clear, the conference is not about one particular personality, institution, region, or member state. The conference belongs to all of us, to citizens, to businesses, to civil society, youth organizations, decision makers, and of course to the Croatian Pan-European Union. We need to strengthen our representative democracy by offering an opportunity for our enhanced deliberative democracy. Now is the right time to put innovative tools, like the Conference on the Future of Europe, to work for both democracy and the citizens. That is one of the lessons learned from the pandemic. Only by closely involving our citizens can we move on from this crisis. This process on the conference must be guided by the principles of inclusiveness and openness. It is of fundamental importance that all citizens are included. We will not leave anyone behind. I want to engage with those who do not usually engage with us. Using a mixture of physical, online, and hybrid events, everyone will have the possibility to participate in an interactive way, including via a multilingual digital platform designed to be a one-stop shop for all information relating to the conference. Prior to COVID-19, I was on a listening tour of the European Union. Having already held many dialogues with citizens, I am convinced that issues such as healthcare and the European response to the public health crisis will now have a more prominent role in the dialogues among citizens during the conference. This was underlined by President von der Leyen in her recent State of the Union address. Citizens must know that their voices are heard and see the impact that their input can have on policymaking in the European Union. This will be our benchmark for success. Most of all, I believe that predetermining the outcome would cause more damage to democracy than if we did nothing at all. Citizens' trust in democracy cannot and should not be taken for granted. I have been an elected representative at local, national, and European level, so I know what I'm talking about. Dear ladies and gentlemen, it is time to get creative about innovative political participation. The Conference on the Future of Europe should give us a clear indication of the key concerns of European citizens. As I said earlier, I'm convinced that many issues will be linked to the health, but I think they will also link to the demographic challenges we are all facing. If that is confirmed, we can translate our policymaking into concrete, fair action to achieve the twin priorities of the green and digital transitions. The Conference on the Future of Europe is an opportunity to reconnect with citizens beyond elections and help to establish trust, reinforce solidarity. So let's get citizens on board and work together to build the society we want now and in the future. Let's build up our democratic immunity and inject our democracy with citizen engagement and deliberation from the ground up. We succeed in this together. I include you too, the Croatian Pan-European Union. Hvala vam lijepa.
In this very inspirational address, Mrs. Šuica stressed the importance of democracy as the best invention for the future of Europe, in which the citizens have to participate as well and be at the very heart of the policy making. This crisis onset by the pandemics, in fact, sped up digital transition and opened possibilities for setting up a digital platform as the means of including citizens in the work of the Conference on the Future of Europe. Of course, it's not only the Croatian Pan-European Union, but also the International Pan-European Union, as well as the International Pan-European Union can be a platform for these debates. Our next speaker, Monsieur Alain Terrenoire, President of the International Pan-European Union, will say more about his vision of the European Union and the way in which the International Pan-European Union is working. Monsieur Terrenoire, the floor is yours.
Damit wir nicht zu lange
While we are waiting for Mr. Terrenoire to come online, maybe we could give the floor to Mr. Bayer, since he is ready. Madam Markić, Boban, dear Mislav, dear Pavel, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, President Terrenoire, although the Croatian Pan-European Union is celebrating its 30th anniversary, I will actually take us a bit further in the past, 4 decades. On the 13th of May 1981, on St. Peter's Square in Rome, several bullets were fired. John Paul II, the first pope from the family of Slavic people, was shot and wounded. The dictatorship of evil, the enemy of God and people, tried to silence the voice of the truth. Pope John Paul II set the final challenge to the atheist communism, not by using nuclear missiles or armies, but by using words and the truth. He was explaining to people the truth of humanity, and thus he reminded them of their God-given dignity and their rights. And in this way, he again inspired hope for freedom in them. Have no fear was his message to the oppressed, the enslaved, the devoid of rights. And this is why the father of lies and his sons in Moscow, members of the Soviet Secret Service, decided to kill this pope. Alain, the mercenary from St. Peter's Square, was later on surprised how it was possible for John Paul II to survive the deadly shots. Not even the Pope himself couldn't explain it. He said one hand pulled the trigger, another guided the bullet. Whose hand was it? The one that so powerfully interfered with history. The Pope survived the attempt on his life. However, a decade later, and now we are speaking about 1991, the Soviet Union died. The Soviet Union that Ronald Reagan described as the evil empire, and justly so. And so did Yugoslavia. The Pope's call, have no fear, to both dictatorship handed the mortal blow. When people conquered their fear, or more precisely speaking, when the yearning for life outgrew fear, since then, the misanthropic ideology of the atheist communism stood no chance. In 1991, the Soviet Union exploded, and so did Yugoslavia. Just like with any big explosion, or theologically speaking, with every exorcism, huge devastation ensues. violence, horrors, lies, chaos, and dirt. So much of it is still hovering in the air and poisoning our society. Until today, nobody has entirely tackled the legacy of the totalitarian communism, and even nowadays we are still missing this huge admittance of guilt on behalf of the perpetrators, as well as those who did not take action when they were supposed to do so, and they are invited to atone for their crimes. How can reconciliation and healing take place? Not even God can forgive sins that had not been admitted and repented for. What happened in 1991 was not the battle between different interests or peoples. It was, in fact, a battle between the will for freedom and tyranny, the battle of humanity versus barbarism, humanity versus the lack of it. Still, the united Europe in 1991 did not, like the knight in the shining armor, come to the rescue of people in Croatia, Slovenia, and Bosnia-Herzegovina who were yearning for freedom. And the history of guilt of those times has to also deal with the question, did united Europe forget about European values? Was Europe ready to watch how these values were being smoldered in Vukovar, in Sarajevo, in Srebrenica, in Banja Luka? Who will save the identity of Europe when the representatives of Europe themselves forgot about it? I still remember very well how my dear friend Mislav Ježić, since 1991, as an honorary, unpaid ambassador without any official credentials, on behalf of this country, toured Europe in order to open the eyes of politicians at the time, often successfully, but sometimes to no avail. Not only that he was the ambassador of the Croatian people, but he was also an eloquent preacher of freedom, human dignity and rights. So, the European values. Dear Mislav, I remember our joint rides in Bavaria, your speech in Passau, in Augsburg, the visit to the Bavarian minister in Munich. And I remember our trips to Osijek, Đakovo, Vinkovci, Zadar in 1992. Let us remember with gratitude these big European names that in 1991 knew which call Europe had to follow. Otto von Habsburg, his 10th anniversary is, or rather the 10th anniversary of his death is going to be in July, spent many years in the European Parliament fighting for the freedom of Croatia and fighting for the right of Croats to Europe. He did it before and much more clearly, much more consistently and much more courageously than many a politician who later saw streets named after them. Why have I been speaking about the past for such a long time? Because history shows and proves that Europe is not a goal in itself. The goal of the European unification is not cooperation or the alliance of European states as such. Therefore, advocating for Europe is not a mathematical, an accountancy, a logistical or technical task. It is first and foremost a spiritual task. The goal of the unification of Europe is the defense and development of the form of life that had been developing in Europe for centuries. It has its roots in the recognition of the God-given human dignity, inspired by Christianity, and it achieves its goal in the rule of law and freedom. And all this is nowadays under threat. Freedom and the rule of law have never been irrevocably guaranteed, but they are never completely lost either. They always demand our labor, our passion, our readiness to be truthful and brave. Even today, the European way of life is facing many challenges. Here, I would like to provide one explicit example. In Beijing, Moscow, Ankara, aggressive concepts are dominant, and they are contrary to the European understanding of human life and the rule of law. These opposing concepts are spread by contemporary means and opportunities here amongst us in Europe. The powers that be in Moscow, Beijing, or Ankara, unlike us, pan-Europeans, do not believe in the strength of the truth. They believe in the power of misinformation campaigns. They do not believe in the God-given dignity of men as the source of their freedom. They do not believe in the necessity to submit every might to the force of right. Instead, they propagate authoritarianism, despotism, ideological or pseudo-religious collectivism, desire for power, lies, and misinformation. And again, the Southeast Europe is nowadays dramatically underrated, and it has become a playground for the influences exercised by China, Russia, and Turkey in Europe. The Europeanism has to be proven today. And as of recently, it's not even something that goes without saying, because it presupposes Europe turning to its own values. The biggest threat to the truly European understanding of human dignity, freedom, and the rule of law is not external, but internal. What worries me most is not the strength of other world and regional powers, but rather the weakness of Europe, and not its military or geopolitical weakness, but rather its spiritual weakness. I would therefore like to conclude in the same vein in which I started, by reminiscing of the Pope John Paul II. At the far west of Europe, in Santiago de Compostela, this holy Pope in 1982 called upon, and I quote, "You, old Europe, find yourself, be yourself, discover your beginnings, revive your roots, and return to life, to those true values that make your history honorable and put you above other parts of this planet." Thank you, Mr. Bayer, for all these lovely messages. Thank you very much for reminding us of the need to preserve European values, the real democratic and Christian values, human dignity, freedom that is translated into the rule of law and freedom. And we can still hear the resounding words of the Pope John Paul II, have no fear. We should have no fear from looking back in the past of Europe that gives us strength to safeguard our future. Now I hope that we are able to hear Mr. Terrenoire.
And I hope to hear as well.
Vous m'entendez? Donc, bonjour.
I hope you can hear me now. Good afternoon, dear friends and pan-Europeans from Croatia and from other parts of Europe. I'm very pleased to be able to be here today and to see you. Unfortunately, I cannot see you live and eye to eye, but only through the help of the audiovisual media. And in several days and weeks, I hope that we will be able to shake hands live, and this will be a very good news for all of us who celebrate Europe, Europe that we love, Europe that we wanted, that our founders wanted to achieve, including our great founder, Kudengove Kalergi. This is the Europe that turned its back on war and conflict 71 years ago. This is the Europe that was advocated by Robert Schuman, and this is the Europe that we have been building step by step together by gathering together. This is the beautiful Europe. What is this Europe? Primarily, it is civilization. It is a civilization whose roots come from the antique Greece, from the Mediterranean area. It unites us through our spiritual references, through freedom and democracy, as we were reminded by the Vice President of the European Commission, Mrs. Šuica. These are the values that make Europe that we love and Europe that we want. At the same time, it is an open and joint market which made it possible to all of the participants of this market, after many years of suffering. Enlargement of Europe is still not completed. We have to continue this enlargement in order to cover the southeast part of Europe and to include all of those who are ready to fight with us for Europe in which they have an equal position. And these are our friends in Eastern and Southeastern Europe. I also refer to our friends who are not yet members of the European Union because they decided not to become members, such as Norway or Switzerland. I hope you can still hear me. This is the Europe. This is not Europe as we knew it before the Second World War. It is Europe of a new age, of a new century. At the end of the previous century, we were in a situation where we thought that our civilization was rescued, that we fought for peace and that there would be no conflicts. But from the beginning of this century, we could see the rise of autocracy in Russia, terrorist attacks in Europe, the growth of China and other global forces, and we had to conclude that Europe cannot simply remain at the level of internal market. It has to preserve its civilization, its values, its reference values, and this is something that requires a different kind of approach to strengthening common borders, common interests. It requests an approach of being able to defend our borders. We have to take into account the reality of the world as it is today. We are no longer part of an open world. We are not a part of a happy globalization. We are now part of a big competition of big forces, Russia, China, United States. Russia is threatening our eastern neighbors. What is Europe doing? Europe cannot feel that peace is guaranteed forever. This is not the case. Threats are piling up. And we could see this in our neighborhood. We could see this in the Middle East. We could see that the demographic developments in North Africa are such that we have to prepare. We cannot have Schengen as the only protection of our borders. We have to engage in dialogue with our neighbors in order to preserve our civilization and our prosperity. This is something that requires a lot of work on developing technologies. These technologies sometimes come from the outside, but we are able to create our own technological advancements. We have 450 million people. We can be a force of our own. We don't have to be under various other forces, these people are guaranteeing our force, and this is our guarantee for the future, for our children and for our grandchildren. I want to emphasize something else. When we think about Robert Schuman, and I had the opportunity of meeting him when I was a child, because my grandfather was a very fervent European of Demo-Christian orientation. He participated actively in the Second World War as in the resistance movement, and he knew Robert Schuman. He introduced him to me. I was a child back then, but as many other members of my family, I believed that Europe should be an active player. And through these contacts, through the friendship and messages that I received as a child, I continued to work, and I continued to keep contact with members of my family with whom I shared these ideas. I will see my grandchild Martin in a couple of days. His parents are of different origins. His mother is partly European and partly has origin from one of the third countries, and his father is of Germanic and Bulgarian origin. And this is Europe. This is something that we need to nourish. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Monsieur Terrenoire, for always very inspiring speeches. You gave us a very good overview of the geopolitical situation in Europe, and also I would like to congratulate you for your grandson, for the small Martin, who is a true European citizen. Now I would like to ask the Secretary General of the European Union, our dear friend Mr. Pavel Barišić, to give us a final address of this conference and to give us his impetus for joint European future. Thank you very much, dear Mrs. Markić Boban, dear pan-European friends, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to bid you a warm welcome to all of you who gathered in this room, but also to all who connected with us online and remotely. The pandemic has limited gatherings, but media technology has allowed us to connect and to discuss remotely. Allow me to bid warm welcome to our guests and remote speakers, President Alain Terrenoire. We managed to establish a connection. Thank you for your patience. So he addressed us from Paris, and Stefan Bayer addressed us from Graz. I'm glad that after this short break we could continue this series of round tables within the Europe Day, or related to celebrating Europe Day. This is a very commendable tradition. This year is the 30th anniversary, and the last anniversary that we celebrated was the 25th anniversary. And on both occasions, we heard a wonderful address by our President Mislav Ježić. I hope that favorable epidemiological conditions will allow us to organize an international conference on the occasion of our 30th anniversary. But this is certainly not something that we can influence now. We will see if the conditions will allow it. I will be reflecting upon several topics from the past, present, and future of Europe and the upcoming 100th anniversary of the Pan-European Union. Referring to the statement by the President of the International Pan-European Union on Europe in the 21st century, I will be speaking about the Conference on the Future of Europe and the Pan-European project of developing a European Center for Peace and Cooperation, Marija Zvijezda, in Banja Luka. I will be reporting on this because significant progress has been made in this respect. International Pan-European Union is celebrating the first centennial next year. So it will be a series of events that will commemorate 100 years of its activities, where it was dedicated to building a better European future. 4 years after the Great War, as it was called, so the First World War, which shook the entire world, but caused greatest destruction precisely on the European continent and caused great destruction to European civilization. Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi published on the 21st July 1922, he published his first article in 2 newspapers at the same time, Vossische Zeitung in Berlin and Neue Freie Presse in Vienna. He published his article on the European issue, die Europäische Frage. In this article, he presented 2 key ideas which have remained the main concepts of the pan-European movement for the entire century. And these 2 ideas were unification and peace. He invited European citizens to unite in a union of countries with the aim of preserving peace in Europe and in the world. Both these newspapers, so Vossische Zeitung from Berlin and Neue Freie Presse in Vienna, so both these newspapers printed his well-known piece, Pan-Europe, ein Vorschlag, a proposal, and this was in November 1922. It was the first call to all advocates of the United States of Europe to join the Pan-European Union. His proposal consisted of 9 short chapters, and in the last chapter, his proposal entitled Pan-European Union presented several points that we should be reminded of today, because they do not only refer to the past, but also to the present and future of Europe. Presenting a clear alternative of unite or perish, he demanded a review of unfair provisions of the peace accords, a permanent and eternal peace treaty. This was his idea of an eternal peace. He wanted a binding court of justice for all European states, abolishment of all internal customs and transportation borders in Europe. He wanted the creation of a European currency, unification of all European armed and naval forces in the defense of the common border, tearing down of all inner European forts and reinforcement of the European limes, at the eastern border. He wanted a true protection for minorities and punishment of all hate speeches in the press and in schools as treason against Europe. And he wanted to strengthen the feeling of European solidarity through strengthened cooperation between European schools and the drafting of a European constitution. At that time, it seemed like a very utopian program. He announced that a pan-European Union will be established, consisting of people ready to support and promote European thinking. A centennial is therefore an opportunity for celebration across all pan-European branches. It is now a good opportunity to summarize which of these 10 key points have been accomplished so far and what awaits us in future. International Pan-European Union, looking back at 100 years of its history, has the task to highlight that more than half of its founding program has already become political and legal heritage of the European Union. We need to research and make public how this movement developed in individual countries and pan-European organizations. This is an opportunity to prepare exhibitions in each pan-European member, to organize conferences and issue publications on the path crossed thus far, on the current state of play and the new challenges that await us in future. In this context, I would like to report that the President of the International Pan-European Union, Mr. Alain Terrenoire, presented a declaration on Europe of the 21st century to all pan-European members and to general public. He provided a great overview of the status quo and the challenges that this continent is faced with in preserving our civilization. He particularly highlighted the threat of climate change, of strong demographic growth in Africa, spreading of the Islamic terrorism in Europe, Turkey as the candidate for the European Union, and unacceptable strengthening of neo-Ottoman expansionism, autocratic rule and revival of Russian imperialism, spreading of Chinese influence and Chinese development based on the foundations of a totalitarian communist ideology on the one hand, and aggressive capitalism that increasingly assumes the role of a dominant world power. Merciless race for power in the United States and the policy of its presidents focused on defending their own supremacy and privileged interest in the world. And he also said something about globalization and emergence of new global powers and on relations, new distribution of powers in the world order. Starting from these confrontations and globally competing interests, he advocated strengthening of Europe as a united, independent and sovereign power capable of dealing with challenges and affirming itself in its areas of competence. He proposed several concrete institutional reforms aimed at improving European Union as an efficient peacekeeping force that is able to preserve its civilization and solidarity principles and defend European citizens and keep its own independence. This declaration was welcomed by many, and it was published in the journal entitled European Letters by the European Association Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi. President Terrenoire was proposed for this award, Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi Award, for next year. The third point that I would like to mention in this conference, and it was mentioned several times also by the Vice President of the European Commission, and also by the State Secretary Metelko-Zgombić. I wanted to know also what was concretely being done in this respect, and even this conference is part of the communication in order to prepare this conference, which will have a very intense agenda. The executive board of the conference consists of EP members, representatives of the Council of the European Union and the European Commission, and they published a multilingual digital platform and invited all citizens to get involved in the discussion on their own future and the European future. We are all invited, and I hope we will find a way to get actively involved and to give our contribution to building a better future. Finally, I would like to report on the project that the International Pan-European Union is involved with, and I think also the Hans-Seidel Foundation. It concerns the building of the values that our founding members started and that are continued by our current president. And this is, it concerns the building of the European Center for Peace and Cooperation, Marija Zvijezda, in Banja Luka, in the building of a former Trappist monastery in Banja Luka. Monsignor Bishop Franjo Komarica opened a center, Marija Zvijezda. The opening ceremony coincided with the 195th anniversary of establishing this monastery, which was once the largest Trappist monastery in the world, with its founder, Franz Wanner. The center gathered monks from 16 various countries who cooperated in this unique spiritual and cultural project important for the development of Southeastern Europe. The opening ceremony was attended by many renowned persons, representatives of various nations and religions from Bosnia and Herzegovina and the Republic of Croatia. And on this occasion, it was announced that this European Center for Peace and Cooperation should be established precisely on this cultural crossroads. Support was given by the President of the International Pan-European Union, presidents of pan-European organizations in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Austria, Germany, Croatia, and many members, and the welcome address was given by the Deputy Secretary General of the International Pan-European Union, Vanja Gavran. This project was presented on 6th October 2020 in the government of the Republic of Croatia at a meeting with the Prime Minister, Mr. Andrej Plenković, the Minister of Foreign and European Affairs, Gordan Grlić-Radman, and the State Secretary, Zvonko Milas, and along with Bishop Komarica and the Director of Caritas of the Banja Luka Bishop's Office, Mr. Miljenko Ančić. There were other important officials present, and support was expressed to this initiative, and it was concluded that this project should focus especially on in the area of cooperation in the field of education. And the former president of the Federal Republic of Germany, Christian Wolff, and Bishop Franjo Komarica issued invitations for joining membership in the founding committee, so that another 18 members were included from Central and Western and Southeastern Europe, and from countries such as Austria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, France, Croatia, Hungary, Germany, and Poland. There are many renowned members from the field of European policy, civil society, and they are mutually connected through long-term cooperation and meetings with Bishop Komarica and Banja Luka. 3 members are active MPs in the European Parliament. Several members are former members of the European Parliament, and the emphasis is on educational contents and interreligious and interethnic dialogue. This European Center for Peace and Cooperation was established as an independent international organization for educational programs, meetings, cooperation, and exchange in the field of intercultural, interethnic, and interreligious dialogue, with the purpose of further building peace with the headquarters and with the seat in this former Trappist monastery in Banja Luka. So the emphasis is on educational programs which study European culture, history, geography, and multilingualism. And the idea is for Bosnia and Herzegovina to become a beacon of European culture of coexistence, tolerance, peace, and cooperation. The mission consists in attracting European youth and teachers to organize meetings, field trips, visits to certain historic and cultural venues, to practice dialogue and understanding, to establish contacts, to build bridges among people, nations, countries, faiths, and cultures. What will the future bring? This is something that is very difficult to say, very difficult to foresee. But what our pan-European founders have shown us is that we have to think about this future. We have to discuss this future, and we have to do everything in our power for this future to be what we want it to be. And I will finish my presentation with a very nice saying about future by one of the greatest advocates of European peace and unification, Victor Hugo, in French.
Plusieurs noms. Pour les faibles, ils se nomment l'inaccessible. Pour les peureux, ils se nomment l'inconnu. Pour les courageux, ils se nomment opportunité.
This means the future has many names. For the weak, it means the unattainable. For the fearful, it means the unknown. For the courageous, it means opportunity. In this spirit, I invite you, my dear pan-European friends, to boldly use this historic occasion and to shape the future of Europe as the bold ones, as the courageous ones, the ones who will give their contribution to the European unification, supporting peace. Thank you for your attention.
Hvala najljepša, gospodine Barišiću.
Thank you, Mr. Barišić.
Na imenovanju nas ovdje svima danas, hrabrima koji...
Calling all of us here today brave, who use the future as an opportunity. I would like to thank you for informing us on the project Marija Zvijezda in the Trappist monastery in Banja Luka. This is indeed a valuable project. The other day, I spoke about the project with Mr. Klaus Fiesinger and our headquarters in Munich, and I am sure that we are going to be able to participate in this project to the extent of our abilities. I usually do not like to name any names following us over Zoom, because then I name one person and I do not mention all the others. But I am really glad that Lidija Bradara is with us today, who is a delegate in the House of Peoples of Bosnia and Herzegovina, who is our dear partner on a number of projects. When it comes to the anniversary, once again, congratulations for the 30th anniversary of the Croatian Pan-European Union. We are looking forward to marking the 100th anniversary of the International Pan-European Union. I have to say that our Zagreb office will celebrate its 20th anniversary next year, so I am sure there will be a number of activities that we are going to organize together. At the very end, I would like to relate a wish of our dear friend, Pan-European, Dr. Mladen Anderlić. He is our ambassador in Budapest, and he would like to take the floor to conclude this round table today. The floor is yours. Good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from a cloudy and rainy Budapest. I hope that the weather in Zagreb is, or I think it is the same, but what I envy you, if not the weather, it's definitely the fact that you are all together in the same room. Congratulations on the first 30 years of the Croatian Pan-European Union. And I would also like to wish a happy Europe Day to all of you. Allow me also to go back to the time of heroes in the 1990s, when all of this started, when the Croatian Pan-European Union and the Hans-Seidel-Stiftung started its work hand in hand with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Indeed, in the 90s, we were touring the country from Karlovac to the newly liberated Knin as a part of the peaceful integration. Also, we visited Vukovar, then Split, Dubrovnik, and we were present in Zagreb at all times. A number of activities, a number of conferences, a number of public events were organized through good quality and, I would say, smart synergy of the authorities and the society. And I believe that we are continuing in the same vein, and we are doing so despite the circumstances that somewhat changed now within the European Union and make things maybe a bit more difficult than before. Despite our experiences in Croatia and in our neighborhood at the time of the aggression, the fight for freedom and the victory, and despite the long and hard road we took in order to accede to the European Union, I would like to say the following. When you look at what is happening around the European Union and in other parts of the world, I would say that we are still going through the times of deepening and widening. So deepening of the values, ideas, paths, and ways of functioning of the European Union, and widening of the European Union by including those states who still have not become members. When you look at these two parallel but equally important processes and the way in which they are conducted, everything boils down to certain criteria and standards. And I invite you to think a little bit about the criteria and standards. When it comes to the enlargement, these criteria and these standards are to the greatest extent well known. There are certain rules, there are certain manners of behavior, there are certain prerequisites that have to be met by every candidate country in order for this country to become a full-fledged member of the European Union. This actually brings us to the moment of implementation. Everything is accepted, but is implemented either slowly, partially, or not at all. Sometimes there is even attempts to simply skip certain steps. And unfortunately, we see it in almost all candidate countries. These are different issues. Things happen in different phases, but again, they happen, and there is no adequate response to that. On the other hand, the enlargement is a necessary process for the European Union as a part of the larger integration context. And this brings us back to the beginning. Even the most basic foundations of the European Union are sometimes put into question. This is not something that is forbidden. I'm not saying that this is bad. And it is acceptable as a method. However, it does seem to me that it is a bit pretentious on anybody's behalf to put on the question mark the definitions of human rights, rule of law, the freedom of media, the democratization process, liberalism. This has become a sort of a habit. As I said, it's good to pose questions, but unless these questions do not take us forward, then maybe we should try and select different methods and ask different questions. As I said, when it comes to enlargement, there are criteria and standards on one hand that are not always fully implemented, and then on the other, there are tenets of the European Union that are being put into question without achieving any progress. I believe there is room for work and improvement. The European Union, from its very starts as the European community for coal and steel until today, is definitely a space for peaceful and fruitful coexistence. Thank you very much. Greetings from Budapest. Thank you very much, Mr. Anderlić, for this address, and thank you very much for reminding us of a very important dichotomy of deepening and widening that is at the very core of the EU project. At the very end, maybe we should look back and look at the Schuman Declaration. Since 1950 until 2021, in this period, enormous progress has been achieved by the EU project and is basically something that makes Schuman's words almost prophetic. Europe will not be created at once and on the basis of the single plan. This is a project on which all of us have to work together. And now, instead of the conclusion, I will give the floor to our dear academician Ježić, who will conclude the round table on behalf of the Croatian Pan-European Union. Thank you very much. At the very end, I would just like to say a very warm and heartfelt thank you to all those who participated. I would like to thank our co-organizers from the Hans-Seidel Foundation, Mrs. Markić, Boban, and Mr. Fiesinger. I would like to thank our dear President of the International Pan-European Union, Mr. Alain Terrenoire. His passionate and very thought-through European speech was a source of inspiration. I would like to thank Secretary General of the International Pan-European Union, Pavel Barišić, the Vice President of the European Commission, who we had the honor of hearing today as well, our MEP, Mr. Tomislav Sokol, our dear friend, Mr. Stefan Bayer, with whom from the very first days of our existence we have had a wonderful cooperation and who helped us a lot. I would like to thank all those who participated and, of course, Dr. Anderlić, who joined us from Budapest. And as he said himself, we have had long-standing cooperation. maybe it is quite adequate that the pan-European had always been pioneer of the European project. And I think it is good that this year, even before the official beginning of the Conference on the Future of Europe, partly because of the pragmatic reasons, because it's still a working day, a Friday, but partly for other reasons, that we held this round table that is an integral part of the conference that is going to officially start on Sunday, under the competence of Mrs. Šuica. The prophetic declaration of Robert Schuman, who was, of course, a member of the Pan-European Union even before the Second World War, as well as the first text of the founders of the Pan-European movement, among them Coudenhove-Kalergi, is something that is very vivid today. When you read what Coudenhove-Kalergi mentioned in his first text and in his founding statement, Mr. Barišić talked about that, you can feel that whatever has been achieved is an integral part of what he anticipated, suggested, and requested at the time. Maybe a smaller number of supporters believed that this was feasible at the time, but they were all prominent politicians and intellectuals of Europe. Today, there are more who believe in that, but not everything has been indeed implemented and realized. Still, his words, given the multipolarity of the world that we live today, are even more topical than they were at the time, I think. By accepting the technological changes, the scientific changes, and everything that this brought about in the world today, the Pan-European Union remains one of the rare organizations that can always go back to its roots and has no need to change the very founding principle that it started from, and can continue advocating these fundamental values without which there is no future of Europe. Thank you all for participating. Thank you all who joined us in person today. We would like to also thank the technical support and to our excellent interpreters for their support and work throughout the conference. I would like to indeed express my deep thanks for all of you who are with us on-site and off-site. Thank you. I wish you a happy Europe Day.